Hello traders, welcome back to the comprehensive course on options trading. I have already introduced to you the idea of what an option chain is. It is like a detailed menu listing all the necessary information a trader requires to make a decision. Even though a large amount of data is available, it will be of no use if you don't know how to make proper use of it. You need to learn how to properly analyze the data provided in order to arrive at any useful conclusions that could potentially translate into a trade. One such analysis you need to make is regarding the moneyness of options. For context, take a look at this NSE option chain and tell me why are some areas highlighted in yellow while others remain with a white background. Understanding this distinction is the first step towards mastering the art of strike selection. We will also look at another key metric called probability of profit, which helps to determine the likelihood of a successful trade outcome. So, without further ado, let's get started. Moneyness of options refers to the relationship between the current price of the underlying asset and the strike price of the option. The term moneyness implies the probability and the intrinsic value of an option, and it indicates whether exercising the option would be profitable or not. So, the moneyness of an options contract revolves around the intrinsic value concept. We have already discussed how to find the intrinsic value of options upon expiry. In brief, the intrinsic value of an option is the money the option buyer makes from an option contract, provided he has the right to exercise that option on the given day. The intrinsic value is always a positive value and it can never go below zero. You all know this. But have you ever wondered why the intrinsic value of options cannot be a negative number? What happens if the intrinsic value is a negative value? Let us understand the reason by taking up an example. Assume that you have taken a long call position. The strike price you have selected is 1000 rupees and the spot price upon expiry is 980 rupees. Let us assume the premium paid for the 1000 call option is 30 rupees. Now, if you were to exercise this option, what you get is the intrinsic value. In the previous episodes, we have used a very polished formula for finding the intrinsic value using the maximum function. But the raw way of finding intrinsic value is to take the difference between the spot price and the strike price. In case of this call option contract, the IV is the difference between the spot price and the strike price. Now, putting in the values of spot and strike prices, it will return an intrinsic value of minus 20 rupees. Now, what does this imply? This means the money is debited or there is a cash outflow from the buyer's account. Assuming this to be true, and since the spot price is lower than the strike price upon expiry, what will be your total loss? Now, the total loss of the buyer is given by the difference between the intrinsic value and the premium paid. This turns out to be minus 50 rupees. Now tell me, can this be true? It cannot be true because we know that the maximum loss for a call option buyer is limited to the extent of the premium paid, which in this case is equal to 30 rupees. However, if you assume a negative intrinsic value, this generalization of option payoff profile will be violated. So in order to maintain the unique property of option payoff, the intrinsic value can never be negative. The same logic can be applied to put options as well. I hope the concept is sorted. Now, if you have a good grasp on the intrinsic value concept, then moneyness of options will be very easy to comprehend. As mentioned earlier, moneyness of an option is a classification method that sorts each option strike based on how much money a trader will make if he were to exercise his option contract today. Generally, this includes three classifications. These are in the money or ITM options, at the money or ATM options, and out of the money or OTM options. But for practical purposes, I guess this is not enough. And to be more specific, it is best to further classify these strikes as deep in the money, at the money, out of the money, and deep out of the money options. These names might be new to some of you, but trust me, understanding these strike classifications are fairly simple. The basic idea is intrinsic value. In layman terms, if the intrinsic value is a positive value or a non-zero number, then the option strike is considered in the money. On the other hand, if the intrinsic value is zero, then the option is called out of the money, and most importantly, the strike price which is closest to the spot price is called the at the money strike. We will deal with deep in the money and deep out of the money strikes after we have a good idea on ATM, ITM and OTM strikes. Let us consider an example to make this interesting. This is the option chain of Coal India with the expiry on 29th August 2024. The spot price of Coal India is approximately more than 515 rupees. You can see all the available strike prices starting from 400 all the way up to 620 with a 10 rupee difference between each one of them. Our objective is to classify each of these strikes as ITM, ATM or OTM. We will first try to identify the at the money or ATM strike as this is the easiest one to find out. By definition, an at the money option is that option strike which is closest to the spot price. Considering the spot price is a little more than 515, the closest strike price is probably 520. One easy way to do this is to look for the strikes at the middle, particularly where the yellow colored sections end. In this case, it could either be 520 or 530 strikes. Since the spot price of 515 is closer to 520, this will be the ATM strike of Coal India. Having established the ATM option, we will now proceed to identify the ITM and OTM options. We will do this separately for call and put options. We will start with the call options, considering a few strikes. Let these strikes be 400, 480, 520, 550 and 600. The next step is to find the intrinsic value of these strikes, assuming I have exercised my right to by today. For call options, IV is the maximum of 0 and the difference between the spot price and strike prices. Considering the spot price as 515, the IV for 400 strike can be found out. This comes out to be a positive value of 115. Since intrinsic value is a non-zero number, this strike is in the money or ITM. Now, the IV of 480 strike also returns a non-zero value. Therefore, this strike is also an in the money strike. Now, when it comes to the 520 strike, we already know this is the ATM option as it is closest to the spot price of 515. So don't bother to calculate its intrinsic value. Now, moving on to the 550 strike price, the IV returns a 0 value. So as per our definition, this is an out of the money or OTM option. And finally, the 600 strike also has a 0 intrinsic value, suggesting that it is also an out of the money option. Now, using this data, let us make some generalization for a call option. All option strikes that are higher than the ATM strike are considered OTM strikes. Likewise, all option strikes that are below the ATM strike are considered ITM strikes. A simple way to differentiate them is using the background color. The NSE site represents all the ITM options with a pale yellow background, while all the out of the money or OTM options have a regular white background. Now, just focus on the strikes 400 and 500. Both of them are in the money call options, right? The intrinsic value of these call options turn out to be 115 and just 15 respectively. This is a huge difference. What this implies is that higher the intrinsic value, deeper is the moneyness of the option. Going by this logic, the 400 strike is more in the money than the 500 strike. Therefore, the 400 strike is considered deep in the money, while the 500 strike is just an in the money option. I hope you understand this difference. A similar logic can be applied to out of the money options as well. Even though 550 and 620 are out of the money strikes, the 620 strike has a much lower negative value of raw intrinsic value compared to the 550 strike. Therefore, 620 strike is considered deep out of the money, while 550 strike is just an out of the money option. Now let's quickly run through the same for put options. We will consider the same Coal India example. So the first step is to identify the at the money or ATM strike. Since Coal India is trading at approximately over 515 rupees in the spot market, the option closest to this is the 520 strike. So 520 will be our ATM strike. Now let us pick a few strikes above and below this ATM strike and figure out the ITM and OTM options. Let these strikes be 400, 490, 520, 560 and 620. The next step is to calculate their intrinsic values. Intrinsic value of a put option is obtained as the maximum of 0 and the difference between the strike price and the spot price. We will consider the spot price as 515 rupees. Now putting the 400 strike price into the formula, the IV comes out to be 0. Therefore, 400 strike is an out of the money or OTM option. Similarly, the IV of the 490 strike also comes out to be 0. So this is also an OTM strike. Since 520 is an ATM strike, we don't need to bother finding out the intrinsic value of this option. Moving on, the IV of 560 strike returns a positive value of 35. This means 560 strike is an in the money or ITM option. And finally, the 620 strike returns an IV of 105, which is a non-zero positive value, thereby implying that the 620 strike is also an in the money option. Now, taking this data into picture, we can make some generalization for the moneyness of put options. So all strikes that are higher than ATM options are considered ITM options. Likewise, all strikes that are lower than the ATM options are considered as out of the money or OTM strikes. Another way to differentiate them is using the background color. As mentioned, the NSE site represents all the ITM options with a pale yellow background, while all the OTM options have a regular white background. Now just focus on the strikes 540 and 600. Both these are ITM put options, right? The intrinsic value of these options turns out to be 25 and 85 respectively. This is a considerable difference. What this implies is that higher the intrinsic value, deeper is the moneyness of the option. So going by this logic, the 600 strike is more in the money than the 540 strike. Therefore, the 600 strike is considered deep in the money, while the 540 strike is just an in the money option. I hope you understand this difference. A similar logic can be applied to the out of the money options as well. Even though 480 and 400 strike are out of the money options, the 400 strike has a much lower negative value of raw intrinsic value compared to the 480 strike. Therefore, the 400 strike is deep out of the money compared to the 480 strike, which is just an out of the money option. I hope you have understood what deep ITM and deep OTM options mean. Now you could ask me, what is the need to classify options based on their moneyness? This is a very good question, but the answer to this question lies elsewhere. To be precise, the answer to this lies in option Greeks. In brief, option Greeks are market forces which act upon option strikes and therefore affect the premium associated with these strikes. Thus, a specific market force will impact an in the money option in one way and an out of the money option in another way. Therefore, categorizing the option strikes enables a better understanding of option Greeks and how they influence the premiums. Moving on, let us discuss a related concept called probability of profit or POP in short. This is an important concept which can help with the strike price selection. You might not see this in the NSE option chain, but some brokers provide this metric in their trading terminal. You can check this out for free in the Sensible app or site if you have an account with Zerodha. Now, as we all know, when trading options, we have the freedom to choose our strike price and expiration. And because of this customization, we can also derive some interesting data like probability of that option being ITM or OTM at expiration. So probability of profit is closely tied to the probability of an option expiring in the money or out of the money. Let us first look at the probability of an option expiring in the money. Every option has a certain probability of expiring with a real value or intrinsic value. We will try to understand this basic concept of probability. Let's say Tata Power stock is trading at 500 rupees in the spot market. I am anticipating a decline in the stock prices, and my analysis tells me that the stock could get beaten down to 450 rupees. I'm looking to long a put option at the 450 strike. The 450 put option with the current month expiry has only 10 days to expiration and it is trading for a premium of 5 rupees. while the Tata Power 450 PE with the near month expiry has about 40 more days to expiration and it is trading for a premium of 20 rupees. Here, I'm not taking into consideration the lot size. Now, regardless of the premium value, which option do you think has a higher chance of expiring in the money? We know for a fact that for a put option to become in the money, the spot price has to be lower than the strike price or the IV has to be a non-zero value. Now going by this logic, which put option has the most likelihood of ending up as in the money strike? The put with 10 days to expiry or the put with 40 days to expiry? Now if you have guessed the put with 40 days, then you are correct. Even though these put options are on the same strike, the time to expiration is different. It makes perfect sense that the option with more time has a higher probability of expiring in the money. Therefore, there are more days for the stock to move lower, and these movements could result in the option moving in the money. Now, as and when the expiration comes closer, and if the stock price is still around the 500 range, then the probabilities of the options will continue to decrease. So from this example, you can infer that time is closely related to an option's probability of expiring in the money with a positive intrinsic value. Now that you have understood how time affects an option's probability, let us look at how different strike prices have different probabilities. Let's say the same Tata Power stock is trading at 500 rupees in the spot market. But here, my analysis suggests that Tata Power stock would soar at least until 550 rupees. In this scenario, I'm looking at a few different call option strikes to go long in the same expiration cycle. The current expiry has about 10 days until expiration. If I am looking to go long on the 520 and 540 call option strikes, tell me which strike out of the two do you think have a higher probability of expiring in the money with the current stock price at 500 rupees. Now, if you have guessed the 520 call option strike, then you are correct again. This is because the 520 strike is closer to the stock price than the 540 strike, and both of these options are currently out of the money. Therefore, the 520 strike must have a higher chance of going in the money than the 540 strike. So as a thumb rule, when an out of the money or at the money option move towards in the money to obtain real value or intrinsic value, their probability of expiring in the money keeps increasing. The further in the money the option is, the higher the probability of it expiring in the money. So generally speaking, options that are out of the money have chances of expiring in the money between 0 up to 50%. The at the money options have a probability of expiring in the money around 50%. And lastly, options that are already in the money generally have a 50 to 100% chance of expiring in the money. Now, let's quickly look at the probability of an option expiring out of the money. If learning about the probability of an option expiring in the money was easy for you, then understanding the probability of an option expiring out of the money will be a piece of cake. Since options either end up with real value or expire worthless at expiration, we can take the inverse of an option's probability of expiring in the money to determine the probability of it expiring out of the money. In simple words, 100% of the time, an option either expires out of the money or in the money. So if an option strike has a probability of expiring in the money of 30%, then naturally it must have a 70% chance of expiring out of the money. Even if an option stays at the money upon expiration, the option is technically out of the money if its intrinsic value is 0. Let's take the same examples from the previous case, but we will look at them from the perspective of an option expiring out of the money. Let us assume that the Tata Power 450 PE strike of the current month expiry had a 5% probability of expiring in the money with 10 days to expiration, while the near month contract of 450 put option strike had a 30% probability of expiring in the money with 40 days to expiration. Since the inverse of in the money probability applies to OTM, this must naturally mean that with 10 days to expiry, the current month option has a 95% OTM probability and the 40-day to expiry near month option has a 70% OTM probability. This implies that as we approach expiration, our OTM percentage increases at the same rate our ITM percentage decreases. It is the exact same concept, but just look at it through an inverse lens. In the second case, let us assume that the Tata Power 520 call option strike had a 40% in the money probability, while the 540 call option strike had a 5% ITM probability. Therefore, these options must have a 60% and 95% OTM probability respectively. Again, the same concept, just through an inverse lens. So, as a thumb rule, the further out of the money an option is from the spot price, the higher is the probability of them expiring out of the money. The probability that the stock price will move towards these faraway strikes to make them in the money is very low. So the probability of them expiring out of the money is very high. Now that you have a basic understanding of the probability of ITM and probability of OTM percentages, we will dive into probability of profit or POP, which is actually a very similar concept. Probability of profit is the probability that a trade will be in profit at expiration. It is as simple as that. So probability of profit is closely related to the probability of an option being OTM or ITM depending on whether you are long or short. Remember the next line that I am going to say and frame it in your mind, as this is the crux of strike price selection. So when selling an option, you want the strike to expire out of the money. And when buying an option, you want the strike to expire in the money. It is as simple as that. So when buying an option, the probability of profit is usually lesser than the probability of it being in the money because the option is purchased for a debit and premium leaves your account. Since we are long on the option, the stock would have to move beyond the strike price and the premium paid, or it has to move beyond the break-even point to ensure that we end up making a profit. It doesn't matter if the option has an intrinsic value. As long as the premium paid is not covered, we won't make a profit. This is the reason why probability of profit is usually lesser than the probability of ITM. In the Tata Power example, I need the stock to be trading at 445 rupees at expiration for my current month long put at 450 strike just to break even. I paid 5 rupees as an upfront premium to purchase the right to sell the shares at 450 upon expiry, and even if the stock is at 450 rupees at expiration, I will still lose my premium. The only way for the put option to have value at expiration is if the stock price is below the strike price, hopefully even below the break-even point, giving it an intrinsic value. Now, assuming the spot price of Tata Power is 450 rupees on the expiration day, meaning it equals to the at-the-money strike, the ITM percentage of 450 PE strike is around 50%. But the probability of profit is much lower than 50% because you need the stock price to move to 445 just to break even. I hope you get my point. You may be a little confused, but do revise this multiple times to understand the concepts completely. The opposite holds true when shorting options. In that case, the probability of profit is actually greater than the probability of option expiring out of the money because the option is sold for a credit. This credit is used to buffer the break-even price where the trade is neither at a profit or a loss. Let's take an example to understand this. Let us assume instead of buying the Tata Power 450 put option for a premium of 5 rupees, I decided to short Tata Power 450 PE. Since I am selling the 450 put option strike for 5 rupees in credit, I can use that to improve my break-even price, meaning I would only start making a loss only when the price moves below 445, which is the break-even point. Even if the stock price is at 445 at expiration, I wouldn't be making any losses. If the spot price is at 450 during expiry, even though my OTM percentage is still 50%, but because I can still profit even if the stock drops, I have a much higher probability of profit because I don't start losing money until the stock price drops to 445. So in general, buying an option will result in a lower POP than the ITM percentage reflected for that option, but selling an option will result in a POP higher than the OTM percentage reflected for that option. I hope you now have a decent understanding of the concept. Don't worry if you have any doubts, because we will take up this topic once again when we discuss the strike selection. However, this is all you need to know up until this point, and there are a lot more interesting concepts to learn. And if this video was informative, please consider supporting our efforts. Help this video achieve the target likes. Hit that like button right away. Comment down your queries and suggestions. Also share this video with your friends and fellow traders. If you're new to our channel or you have not yet subscribed, please make sure to subscribe and also enable the bell notification to stay updated about our new video uploads. I will see you guys in the next episode. Till then, bye.